If you've seen any of my other homebrewing videos, you might have known that I have to homebrew inside. There was a small fire-like incident at my apartment complex which no longer allowed me to brew outside on my patio, so I had to bring everything indoors. And that comes with its own unique challenges. I use a traditional propane setup, so that means I have a full-on flame going on right in my kitchen. I also worry about the health hazards of having propane burning inside of a small area. I worry about the gas and everything like that. I decided it's time for me to adapt to my somewhat nomadic lifestyle. I move around a lot and I often have to live in very small areas, which means I need a home brewery that is going to match my lifestyle and my needs. I mean, seriously, look at all this stuff. This is just the basic stuff. This is just the stuff I use on a daily brew session. It's nothing extravagant, nothing too special or out of the ordinary. But what it is over encumbersome, it's crowded, and it takes up a whole lot of space. It is time for me to start thinking about consolidation and thinking about smaller, more transportable brewing methods. I decided to look into using one of these new all-in-one brewing systems that have really gotten popular in the last few years. But there's a ton of them, and they all have a bunch of different functions, and they all have a bunch of different price ranges. So I had to figure out which one is best gonna suit me. And I decided that the perfect one for me is going to be the Brewer's Edge Mash and Boil. The Mash and Boil is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It's a stainless steel vessel that acts as both a mash tun and a boiling kettle. If you remove the lid, you see that there is a stainless steel sleeve on the inside with a false bottom built into it, which allows it to act somewhat like a brew in a bag system, which allows you to no longer be concerned with mash tuns. It's an electric run system, so it plugs into pretty much any wall adapter or power outlet, connects to a heating element that has a digital interface on it that allows you to set the temperatures accordingly, which is extremely convenient because that eliminates the need for a propane tank and a burner, which is absolutely perfect because that's exactly what I needed. I mean, take a look at how much room my old brewery took up, and then look at how much space the Mash and Boil takes up in comparison. That alone was already a huge step in the right direction for my needs, but to be honest, pretty much all of the all-in-one systems do that already, so we need to take a look at what separates this from the others, both good and bad.
One of the first things I need to consider when choosing my all-in-one system was batch size. I've been brewing 5-gallon batches on my 10-gallon Bayou Classic boil kettle for years now. All my recipes are scaled for 5 gallons and I didn't want to alter them for a different size. The Mash and Boil comes in at an attractive 7 etched gallons and probably another half gallon or so on top for headspace. To test its accuracy, I poured in 4 gallons and found out that it came in at a solid inch below the markings. I'm assuming this is to make room for the grain basket, so upon testing it I realized several things. It seems that the etchings do accurately measure the water volumes when dispersed by the grain basket, which is great. However, the way that the etchings are positioned and the snug fit between the walls of the Mash and Boil and the basket make it incredibly difficult to see exactly what your water measurements are. And lastly, you probably have to use less water during the mash to account for additional water dispersal when grain is added to the basket. Now, I assume this is actually a common thing for brew-in-a-bag brewers. However, for someone like me who's been doing full volume mashes, this will be something that I need to get used to. Another limitation we have to deal with is the fact that the grain basket is only capable of holding up to 16 pounds worth of milled grains. So if I plan on doing any beers that require a large mash bill, such as like a barley wine or some type of strong ale or something like that, I may have to find a way to do a multi-step mash in this. Haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to do that yet. The next thing I wanted was to make sure that the Mash and Boil would be able to make my brew day easier. So first I tested its ability to reach rolling boil. When cranked to the maximum power output, it took approximately 1 hour and 10 minutes to reach rolling boil at around 600 feet above sea level. This was a bit of a disappointment because my propane setup could reach boil in about 20 minutes, but I understand this is a less powerful system than that, so I give it a little leeway, but the Mash and Boil's instructions did say it could make a full boil in 50 minutes, so that is a little disappointing. However, one thing that does compensate for this is the fact that you can set a boil timer. The timer is allowed to be set up to 24 hours in advance. So if you wanted to start boiling at 5 o'clock, You can set it for when you start your work day and however long you work, and when you come home, it'll be ready to go as soon as you walk in the door. And that leads me to the next segment. The usability of the digital interface is incredibly user-friendly. You turn it on and you just adjust the temperature to whatever you want your mash to be at. Then you hit the set button and you adjust your time for how long you want to mash. It can go up to 24 hours if you desire. You hit set again and adjust your minutes. Hit set once more and it'll turn on the timer we talked about earlier. And again, it can go up to 24 hours of a delayed start. If you want it to start immediately, just hit 0 and then hit the set button again and it'll immediately kick on and start warming up. When you want to start a boil, you do the exact same thing, just set both the mash timer and the timer to 00 and it'll immediately kick off and start its boil. However, there is one major problem, and it wasn't discussed in the instructions, and I have a huge problem with this. It caused a massive issue on one of my brew days. To set a boil temperature, you need to set it to a minimum of 218 degrees. Most of the time my water boils at 212, but if you set it anything below 218, it will shut off and say there was an error. It's not necessarily a problem with the actual system itself, it's just it needs to be clarified. I'm not exactly sure why it has a specification, but it does, and the fact that it's not listed, a bit frustrating. Moving on, standard commercial immersion wort chillers fit nicely. Wort transfers are made easy due to the embedded spigot. The handles make it easy to lift, and the cleanup is incredibly simple. It's the little things that truly make a difference. But more importantly than the ability to make life easy is the ability to make better beer. So I needed to test its accuracy. And the most important thing, to check its ability to maintain a proper mash, since that is half of its total function. There are two ways to do a mash on this system that I've found, with the heating element on and with it off. With it off, you just need to set a high enough strike temperature that will allow the strike water to compensate for the temperature lost when the grain is added, similar to a normal mash tun. With the multi-layered and thinly insulated walls, you can maintain your temperature for a small amount of time, but you may need to add additional insulation to hold it for extended periods. It gets a bit more interesting with the heating element on. When set to the desired mash temp, it heats up and rises till it meets its goal, and then the heating element shuts off, which will eventually cause a slow decline in the heating. When the temperature sinks too low, the heating element kicks back on and rises above the target temperature and shuts back off, hopefully settling on the desired temp. The problem with both methods is the location of the thermometer. It's low on the system and it basically sits just on top of the heating element, and it doesn't measure the temperature of the collective volume of liquid. Because the system lacks the ability to recirculate the wort, it becomes very difficult to accurately determine what the actual temperature is. The main issue that could stem from this is the inability to maintain an accurate mash temperature throughout your water, causing reduced efficiency. Some adjustments to your recipe or method may be required to compensate. So that about sums up the features and capabilities of the mash and boil. I do want to run through a few additional pros and cons real quick. Pro. Coming in at around $400, it's affordable in comparison to pretty much every other all-grain capable all-in-one system in the market of the same batch size, and it's available on Amazon Prime, so you can have it shipped in about 2 days. Con. You get what you pay for. While it is cheaper than other systems, it also lacks some pretty useful features like the built-in wort chiller, wort pump, and circulation system found in the Grainfather, or the 4th generation RoboBrew. Additionally, you will have to compensate for this with additional hardware that may cost you upwards of several $100s. You'll need a chiller for a good brewing practice, you'll need a wort pump to keep the temperature readings honest, and I found that the grain basket leaves a lot of grain particles floating around in the wort that could leach tannins during the boil, so I had to buy a brew in a bag to solve this problem. Additionally, for super hoppy beers that cause a lot of hop particles floating around in the kettle, I had to get an immersible hop spider to keep the bits off the bottom. To be fair, this is a problem that can be found in every system, but especially for the mash and boil, because there is a sensor located on the bottom that will shut the system off if it gets coated in debris. Con. Speaking of weird engineering designs, the only way to fix a system malfunction or an error is to hit the reset switch, located on the bottom of the system, which becomes especially difficult if it's full of wort, and even more so because these errors usually only occur mid-boil, which can turn your brew day into some sort of powerlifting event where the weights are full of boiling water that could spill on you if you aren't careful. Additionally, I hate how low the spigot is. I know it's a small complaint, but for those of us who brew without pumps, this is kind of annoying. Look how close it is to the ground. If you're a gravity brewer like me, you will have to use a table or counter or something to give it a little elevation. And lastly, for the pros, I gotta say, most importantly,
It makes good beer. See, over the past 6 months, I've brewed probably 30 different batches of beer on the mash and boil with a difference of styles and strengths and ingredients. And I can honestly say the only flaws I've noticed in the beer are from me and not because of a mechanical issue. I honestly think the mash and boil is one of the best improvements I've ever made to my home brewing setup. You're going to get what you pay for. Don't get me wrong. That's both a good thing and a bad thing, as we discussed earlier. But what it really comes down to is it does everything you need it to do. It saves space, it saves time, cleanup is easy, and overall it makes brew day pretty enjoyable and pretty manageable. So I would actually recommend people who are looking to go this route in their homebrew setup to do so. It is one of the best investments I have made into my homebrew setup, so I'm pretty happy with it. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, subscribe, and cheers.